The day I signed the marriage certificate, my hand was steadier than my heart had any right to be, and Sienna Marsh looked at me like I'd just agreed to walk into traffic for her, which, in a way, I had. Don't get the wrong idea. Nobody was crying. Nobody was in love. Not yet. Not on paper anyway. There was a folding table in a courthouse hallway that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. A clerk named Denise who had clearly seen every version of Desperate before, and a woman across from me in a gray blazer, blinking too fast, trying very hard to look like this was a business transaction and not the worst day of her life, dressed up as the best solution she had left. Last chance to run, Sienna said, pin hovering over the line with her name on it. I don't run in dress shoes, I said. Bad for the knees. She almost laughed. Almost. That almost would end up being the most expensive sound of my life, because I spent the next 6 months chasing the rest of it. My name is Julian Reyes. I was 28 then, a structural engineer at a firm downtown that mostly cared whether bridges stayed up and whether I billed my hours correctly, in that order. My life before Sienna Marsh was simple in the boring way people romanticize right up until it isn't boring anymore. It's just lonely with better lighting. I had a 2-bedroom apartment I didn't need, a gym membership I barely used, and a Sunday phone call with my mother where she asked when I was going to stop being married to my job and start being married to an actual person. I told her I was working on it. I did not tell her I was working on it by signing legal paperwork with a woman I'd known for exactly 4 months. All of it complicated. Sienna was 26, ran the books and half the front of house at Marsh's, a diner her grandmother built from nothing on a corner that used to be nothing and was now, thanks entirely to that same grandmother's stubbornness, worth something to men who wore better suits than they deserved. Sienna was sharp in the specific way people get when they've had to be the responsible one since they were about 12. She remembered every regular's order, argued with vendors like she owned a law degree, and had a laugh that came out rare and loud, like she was always a little surprised she'd let it happen. I'd been eating breakfast at Marsh's twice a week for over a year before I knew her name, mostly because I liked the corner booth and the coffee that tasted like it had opinions. I learned her name the day the diner nearly burned down. Not literally. Emotionally. A health inspector with a grudge and a checklist that seemed to be inventing violations in real time. Sienna stood in the middle of her grandmother's kitchen, calm as ice, dismantling his complaints one by one with receipts she pulled out of a folder like a magician pulling rabbits, and I sat in my booth watching a woman argue a bureaucrat into submission over Eggs Benedict, and something in my chest rearranged itself without asking permission. After he left, she dropped into the booth across from me, uninvited, and said, "You've been coming here for a year, and you still haven't learned to tip better." I tip fine. You tip like a man who's never worked a shift in his life. I've never worked a shift in my life. She looked at me for a long second, unimpressed, and somehow charmed anyway. At least you're honest about it. That was Sienna, direct in a way that made most men flinch and made me, apparently, want to know everything else she'd say if I stuck around long enough to hear it. For 4 months, sticking around looked like breakfast twice a week, then 3 times, then a standing joke about my coffee order, then her sliding into my booth without asking because apparently that was ours now. I learned that her grandmother, Rosalind, had raised her after her parents split and mostly disappeared, that the diner wasn't just a business. It was the only stable thing Sienna had ever had, and that Rosalind was sick, the kind of sick that made doctors use careful language and made families start counting time differently. I also learned, the hard way, exactly how much trouble the diner was actually in. Rosalind's will, drafted years earlier by a lawyer who apparently thought he was writing a soap opera instead of a legal document, left the diner to Sienna outright, on one very specific, very old-fashioned condition. She had to be married before her 27th birthday, or ownership passed to her cousin Derek, a man who had never once worked a shift there and who had already, allegedly, been talking to a developer about turning the corner lot into luxury condos. I found this out on a Tuesday, over pancakes, because Sienna told me the way she told me everything difficult, flat and fast, like ripping a bandage off before she could think better of it. My grandmother wrote a will like it was 1962, she said, staring at her coffee instead of me. She thought if I got married, I'd be settled. Stable. She didn't think about what happens if I'm not married by then, because in her head, of course I would be. I'm supposed to be the responsible one. When's the deadline? 11 weeks. I put my fork down. And Derek would sell the building before the ink dried on the deed. He's already got a realtor's number saved as Guy. I saw it on his phone. That's insane. That's family, she said, and the joke didn't land, not even a little, because underneath it her hands were shaking around the coffee cup, and Sienna Marsh's hands did not shake. Not for health inspectors, not for rude customers, not for burst pipes on a Saturday morning. They shook for this. I want to tell you I thought about it for a long time before I said what I said next. I didn't. I thought about it for exactly as long as it took her to look up at me, eyes bright and furious at herself for being scared, and I heard myself say, "Marry me, then." Sienna laughed, one sharp, surprised bark of a laugh. "Julian, I'm serious." "You're not serious. You're being noble at pancakes." "I'm an engineer. I don't do noble. I do solutions." I leaned forward. "You need to be married in 11 weeks to keep the one thing your grandmother built with her own hands out of the hands of a man who has Guy saved in his phone. I'm single. I'm employed. I have decent credit, and I already tip better than you think I do. This is a legal document, not a favor. I know what it is. People don't just marry their regular customer to solve a will problem. People don't just argue health inspectors into submission over eggs, either, but here we are." She stared at me like she was trying to find the trick in it, the angle, the thing men usually wanted in exchange for solutions like this. I watched her look for it and not find it, because there wasn't one, not yet, not anything I could have named out loud at that table. "This would be fake," she said slowly. "On paper. Nothing else." "Sure," I said, and meant it, and also felt something in my chest quietly disagree with me. "I can't pay you. I didn't ask you to. Julian." Her voice cracked slightly on my name, which she almost never did. "Why would you do this?" I thought about lying. I thought about saying something breezy about karma or good deeds or believing in second chances for old diners. Instead, I told her the truth, or the closest version of it I was willing to admit to myself that morning. "Because your grandmother built something real, and I don't think a man with Guy in his contacts should get to bulldoze it because of bad paperwork," I said. "And because you've never once asked me for anything in a year and a half of me eating your eggs, and I'd like the chance to actually be useful to you before you decide I'm just the guy in booth 4. Sienna didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "If you're lying about not wanting anything in exchange, I will find out, and it will be very awkward." "Noted." "Okay," she said, and her voice was steadier now, the responsible one back in charge. "Okay, let's save my grandmother's diner." That's how a man who had never planned to get married before 35 ended up standing in a courthouse hallway 11 weeks later, signing a certificate with a woman who was very clearly still deciding whether to trust him, while a clerk named Denise chewed gum and looked deeply unbothered by the whole thing. "You may kiss the bride," Denise said, flat as the carpet, already reaching for the next folder. Sienna and I looked at each other. This was the part we hadn't planned. We'd planned the paperwork, the timeline, the story we'd tell family, the fact that we'd keep separate bedrooms in my apartment since hers was a studio above the diner too small for 2 grown adults, and one enormous amount of tension. We had not planned the kiss. "We don't have to," I said quietly. "Denise is watching. Denise has seen worse." Sienna exhaled, some private decision settling behind her eyes, and leaned in and kissed me. Quick, closed mouth, entirely for show, and somehow it still knocked something loose in my chest like a wrench dropped down a stairwell. "For the paperwork," she said when she pulled back, cheeks pink. "Purely legal," I agreed, and neither of us moved for a second longer than the paperwork required. Denise stamped something and slid it across the table without looking up. "Congratulations," she said, in the tone of a woman announcing a parking violation. Next, we walked out into the parking lot married, technically, legally, and entirely unprepared for what came next, which was moving Sienna Marsh into my apartment. The first week was mostly logistics, wearing the costume of a marriage. She brought 3 boxes, a plant she swore wasn't sentimental and clearly was, and a folder of diner paperwork thick enough to double as a doorstop. I gave her the guest room, the good Wi-Fi password, and a spare key that felt heavier in my hand than a piece of metal should. "This is weird," she said, standing in my kitchen the first night, looking at my cabinets like they'd personally wronged her. "Which part?" "All of it. You have a spice rack organized alphabetically. Efficiency isn't a crime. It's a cry for help." She opened the fridge, found exactly the amount of food a single man keeps on hand, and closed it again with a look of quiet judgment. "We need groceries." "We? I live here now, Julian. I get a say in the human situation." That became the pattern. Fast, faster than either of us admitted out loud. Sienna reorganized my kitchen without asking. I learned she couldn't sleep without white noise and bought a fan for her room without being told to. She left sticky notes on my laptop when I worked too late, the first one reading, "Your posture is a structural violation. Fix it." I kept that note in my desk drawer and told myself it was funny. It was funny. It was also the first thing I looked for every morning after that. 3 weeks in, Rosalind found out we'd actually gone through with it and insisted on a family dinner at the diner, closed to customers, just us and her and the small collection of relatives who apparently existed specifically to have opinions about other people's lives. "You look nervous," Sienna said in the car, smoothing a wrinkle out of my shirt that wasn't there. "I'm meeting your grandmother as her actual grandson-in-law. I'm allowed nervous." "She already likes you. She's liked you since you started tipping better." "You told her I tip badly." "I lied to make you work harder for it." Sienna's mouth curved, and for a second the nerves in the car eased into something warmer. "Just be yourself. She'll see through anything else in about 4 seconds." That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be reassuring. It's supposed to be true. Rosalind Marsh, it turned out, was smaller than I expected and sharper than anyone had warned me. She sat at the head of the table in a cardigan the color of good coffee, studied me for a long, silent minute while the rest of the family made small talk around us, and then said, without preamble, "You're the engineer who fixed the awning." "I mentioned it once," I said, "during a rainstorm." It seemed relevant. "Sienna's father never fixed anything in his life," Rosalind said. "Left before he had to." Her eyes flicked to her granddaughter, softened, then came back to me, sharp again. "You're not planning to leave, are you?" "No, ma'am." "Good answer. Everyone gives that answer. Convince me." I glanced at Sienna, who gave me nothing, no help, just a small nod that said, "This one's yours." "I'm not planning to leave," I said again, slower this time, "because your granddaughter argued a health inspector into submission with a folder of receipts while I sat in booth 4 and realized I'd never met anyone who fought that hard for something that mattered to her. I didn't marry her to save a building, Rosalind. I married her because I wanted to be somewhere near that kind of fight for as long as she'd let me. The table went quiet. Sienna's cousin Derek, seated 3 chairs down with his phone half hidden under the tablecloth, looked distinctly like a man recalculating his odds. Rosalind studied me a moment longer, then reached over and patted my hand once. Firm, final. "Better answer," she said, and went back to her soup like she hadn't just decided something about my entire future. Under the table, Sienna's hand found mine. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Living together got easier after that dinner, and also harder. In the specific way things get harder when you stop pretending the ground under you is as neutral as you claimed it would be. Sienna started leaving her shoes by my door instead of hers. I started keeping her favorite tea in the cabinet without being asked. We fell into a rhythm that looked, from the outside, exactly like a marriage, because apparently pretending well enough for long enough stops being pretending somewhere around week 6, and nobody sends you a memo when it happens. The diner stabilized. Derek's development buddy backed off once the paperwork was airtight. and Sienna threw herself into the place with the kind of relief that looked like joy from certain angles. I started coming in on Sundays not because I had to, but because watching her run that kitchen still did something to my chest that a year and a half of Eggs Benedict had apparently never fully worn off. It was a Tuesday, ordinary in every way except for what happened at the end of it, when Sienna came home late, dropped her bag by the door, and found me at the kitchen table with blueprints spread out for a job that was giving me trouble. "You're still up," she said. "Structural problem. Client wants a cantilever that physics doesn't want to give them." Sounds like my Tuesday. She dropped into the chair across from me, exhausted in the particular way that comes from being the responsible one for 11 hours straight. "Move over. There's no room." "Make room, Reyes." I made room. She leaned against my shoulder, looking at blueprints she didn't understand and didn't pretend to. And for a while neither of us said anything, and it was, somehow, one of the best silences of my entire life. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Always. Do you ever regret it?" "The courthouse. Denise. All of it." I set my pencil down. "No, not even a little. You didn't sign up for a roommate who reorganizes your spice rack and cries during dog food commercials. I have allergies. You said that about something else entirely once, and it wasn't allergies either time." She smiled, small and tired. "I'm serious, Julian. This wasn't fair to you. I asked you to fake a marriage to save my grandmother's diner, and you just said yes like it cost you nothing." "It cost me plenty," I said quietly. "I just didn't mind paying it." Sienna went still against my shoulder. "What did it cost you?" I looked at her, really looked, the kind of look I'd been careful not to give her for months because I was terrified of what it would give away. About 4 months ago, I started looking forward to Tuesday and Thursday breakfasts more than I looked forward to anything else in my week. And I told myself that was normal. That was just liking good coffee and a booth with decent lighting. Then I married you to save a diner, and I moved you into my apartment, and every single day since then I've had to actively remind myself this is supposed to be fake. "Julian, I'm not finished panicking yet. Let me finish." She laughed, soft and startled, exactly the sound I'd fallen for in that kitchen over a year and a half ago. "Okay, finish panicking. I like coming home and you being here," I said. "I like the sticky notes and the alphabetized spice rack complaints and the fact that you argue with vendors like you have something to prove. Because you don't. Not to me. You already proved it the first time I watched you save that diner with a folder full of receipts. I think I fell for you before either of us signed anything. And I've spent every day since the courthouse trying not to make this weirder than it already is." Sienna was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that my pulse started doing something unprofessional under my ribs. "I've been keeping your sticky notes too," she finally said. "The ones you leave back. Did you know that? I didn't leave many. You left 3. I have all 3 in the drawer under my grandmother's recipe box." Her voice dropped. "Careful now. The way it got right before something true. I told myself I kept them because they were funny. That's what I told myself too. I think we're both lying about the same thing. I think we are." She reached up and touched my jaw. Light. Testing. The way you touch something you're not sure you're allowed to want yet. "So if I kissed you right now," she said, "it wouldn't be for the paperwork." "No," I said. "It really wouldn't." "Good," Sienna whispered, and closed the distance herself, and it was nothing like the courthouse kiss, careful and closed mouth and for show. This one was slow, warm, entirely unhidden, her hand sliding to my collar, mine finding her waist like it had been waiting months for permission it finally didn't need. When we broke apart, she stayed close, forehead against mine, breathing like she'd run somewhere. "Well," she said, "that complicates the fake part. Considerably. Are you upset about that?" "I have never been less upset about anything in my life." She smiled, the real one, the rare loud laugh kind wearing a quieter disguise, and kissed me again like she was making up for 18 months of careful distance in one single night. I wish I could tell you the story ends there, tidy and warm, 2 people finally honest under bad kitchen lighting. It doesn't. Not yet. Because 3 weeks after that Tuesday, Derek came back, and this time he didn't come alone. He showed up at the diner on a Saturday morning with a lawyer in a suit that cost more than most of the tables in the room, and a theory he'd apparently been nursing since the wedding, that a marriage arranged specifically to satisfy a will's condition might not hold up under scrutiny if it could be proven the marriage wasn't, in his exact word, genuine. Sienna called me from the back office, voice tight in a way I'd only heard once before, over pancakes, 11 weeks before a courthouse. "He's trying to contest it," she said. "He's saying it was a sham marriage designed to circumvent the will. If a judge agrees, the whole thing gets thrown out, and the diner goes to him anyway. That's insane. We've been married for months. We live together. I know that. He's arguing intent, not logistics. He wants to depose us, Julian. Separately. He wants to ask us things like when we fell in love and expect the dates to line up perfectly with a marriage certificate. And if they don't, Sienna, breathe. I can't lose this because Derek hired a lawyer who watches too much television." I drove to the diner faster than I should have, walked in to find Derek sitting smugly in booth 4, my booth, drinking coffee like he owned the place, which, if this went badly, he genuinely might. "Julian," he said, all false warmth. "Come to defend your marriage of convenience? Come to remind you which booth is mine," I said, and sat down across from him anyway, because apparently I had opinions about seating now too. "What exactly are you accusing us of, Derek?" "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm asking a judge to look closely at a marriage that happened 11 days before a deadline that would otherwise cost my cousin everything." He shrugged, infuriatingly casual. "If it's real, it'll hold up fine. If it's not, well, it's real. Prove it. I don't have to prove anything to you." "You'll have to prove it to a judge," he said, and judges tend to notice things like separate bedrooms in the first month, prenups that read like exit contracts, and grooms who married their regular customer 4 months after meeting her. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, because he wasn't wrong about the paper trail, even if he was wrong about everything that paper trail had grown into since we'd signed it. That night, Sienna sat on the edge of the bed I hadn't shared with her yet, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking, staring at nothing. "What if he's right?" she said quietly. "Not about us now. About then. What if a judge looks at the timeline and decides intent is intent, and it doesn't matter what happened after? Then we tell the truth," I said, sitting beside her. "All of it. That it started as a favor and became something else. Judges are people, Sienna, not spreadsheets. They can tell the difference between a scheme and two people who got unlucky with timing and lucky with each other. And if they can't?" I took the mug from her hands, set it aside, and held both of hers instead. "Then we lose a legal argument, not each other. Whatever happens with the diner, whatever happens with Derek and his very expensive lawyer, I'm not fake anything anymore, and neither are you. That part doesn't go up for review." Her eyes were bright, unshed, and stubborn. "I hate that I'm scared. You're allowed to be scared. You've spent your whole life being the only responsible person in every room. Let someone else carry part of it for once. That's someone being you. That's someone being your husband," I said, which, in case the timeline confuses anyone, I plan on actually being for a very long time. She laughed, wet and unsteady, and leaned into my shoulder the way she had that first Tuesday night at the kitchen table. And we stayed like that for a long time, not solving anything, just refusing to let Derek's lawyer live in the room with us any longer than he had to. The hearing, when it came, was smaller than either of us expected, a private room, a judge with reading glasses and no patience for theatrics. Derek's lawyer laying out a timeline like a prosecutor building a case against a crime that had never actually happened. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't reach for anything clever. I told the judge about Booth 4, about a health inspector and a folder of receipts, about 11 weeks and a promise I made without calculating the cost, about a sticky note that said my posture was a structural violation, about the exact moment at a kitchen table when a fake marriage stopped being fake and neither of us had scheduled it that way. "I didn't marry my wife to win an argument about a will," I said. I married her because I couldn't stand the idea of a man who keeps a realtor saved as guy in his phone deciding what happens to something her grandmother built with her own two hands. What grew out of that decision isn't something either of us planned, but it's not a scheme either. It's just what happened when you spend enough time being useful to someone you already loved and hadn't found the nerve to say so. The judge looked at Sienna. Anything to add, Mrs. Reyes? Sienna's hand found mine under the table. Just that my grandmother wrote that condition into her will because she wanted me settled with someone who'd show up, she said. He's shown up every single day since the courthouse. I don't think that's the kind of thing you can fake for 4 months straight, Your Honor. I think that's just called a marriage. The judge studied the paperwork a long moment, then looked at Derek's lawyer with the particular patience of someone who had already made up their mind and was deciding how politely to say so. The petition to contest is denied, she said. This court has seen a great many marriages entered into for stranger reasons than this one, and considerably less evidence of genuine commitment than what's been presented today. Mr. Marsh, I'd encourage you to spend your legal fees on something with better odds. Derek's face did something complicated and unflattering. His lawyer closed a folder with the specific sound of money being wasted. Sienna's hand tightened around mine so hard it almost hurt, and neither of us cared even slightly. We didn't celebrate loudly. We went home, ordered too much food from the place around the corner, and sat on the kitchen floor eating out of containers because neither of us had the energy to reach for plates. We survived my cousin's lawyer, Sienna said, mouth full of noodles, entirely undignified and entirely herself. We survived a courthouse, a will, and a man who thinks Guy is an appropriate contact name for anything. Best 6 months of my life, somehow. Mine too, I said, and meant it with a completeness that would have terrified the version of me sitting in booth for 18 months earlier, quietly, carefully falling for a woman who hadn't even learned his name yet. A year after the courthouse, Rosalind passed, gently, surrounded by family, in the apartment above the diner she'd built from nothing. Sienna grieved hard and loud, the way she did everything, and I stayed close, the way I'd promised her grandmother I would, not asking a million questions, just sitting near her until she could breathe again. The diner stayed exactly where it belonged, in Sienna's name, in Sienna's hands, exactly as her grandmother intended, except now with a second name on the deed that hadn't been part of the plan and had become the best part of it anyway. 2 years after the courthouse, on the same corner where Rosalind first opened Marsh's decades earlier, I proposed again, properly this time, no paperwork required, in front of the same booth where I'd first heard Sienna laugh at a health inspector's expense. She said yes before I finished the sentence, then made me finish it anyway because, in her exact words, she'd earned the full speech after everything Derek had put us through. We got married a second time that fall, a real wedding this time. String lights and too much cake, and Denise from the courthouse somehow on the guest list because Sienna tracked her down specifically to invite her. And when Denise showed up, she looked at us both and said, entirely deadpan, "Knew you two would end up like this. Saw it in the paperwork." "You stamped it without looking up," I said. "I look up more than people think," Denise said, and took a slice of cake like she'd earned it, which, honestly, she had. These days, coming home means walking into a kitchen that smells like whatever Sienna's testing for the diner's new menu. Finding sticky notes on my laptop that read things like "Your posture is still a structural violation. Fix it, husband," and falling asleep most nights with her feet cold against mine and her laugh, rare and loud, and entirely mine now, echoing from somewhere in the apartment we built together out of a favor that grew teeth. I married her to save her family's diner. I never expected that coming home to her would become the part of my day I looked forward to more than any other. The quiet proof that some of the best things in a life don't arrive with certainty and speeches. They arrive disguised as paperwork, as favors, as a folding table in a courthouse hallway that smelled like burnt coffee, and they only reveal what they really are once you're brave enough to stop calling them fake. So tell me, what would you have done if you married someone to save their family, and coming home to them slowly became the best part of your day? Have you ever had an arrangement turn into something real before either of you were ready to admit it? Tell your story in the comments. And for those who'd like to be a little closer to us, we've opened memberships where you'll get shorter exclusive stories every week with no ads. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.